So a little bit later we'll have an opportunity to write some of those down. Of course, now you can also jot down some of those messages if you want. I think the most important thing is, whether you saw it now in that visualization or not, is to spend time over the next weeks, definitely, to just get a sense of where you want to be by the end of this year, where you want to be, what you want to have shifted through the breath work. On the one hand, what you would like to learn perhaps, or how you would like to grow in your journey with breath work itself, but also on the other hand, in your life in general. What are the qualities, the emotions, the relationships, the inspirations, or the inspired life that you would like to experience. So, of course, the breath itself is raw energy. So our intentions create a channel for that raw energy to follow. So, this is really a way of cultivating the life, the energy that we want to create, so that we can move forward with awareness, and that we can, best use our energy in the best way possible. And of course, life always will be a curved path. It's never going to be a straight line, and it's never going to go exactly the way you think your intentions should manifest. But always creating the channel is valuable in itself, because of course, our intentions can change along the way, and maybe once you've undertaken a certain distance along the path of your intention, and you realize it's not for you, or that you want to reevaluate, that of course is something we can always do, and it's always important to sort of reevaluate our process along the way. But certainly as a start, it's very important to have this sense of intention. The word intention is maybe a little bit more, let's say, neutral, or a little bit more kind of scientific. Another word for that, of course, is our prayers. And the word prayer brings in more of a spiritual dimension. So in that regard, it's probably a more valuable way of looking at this. When we pray, we are, on the one hand, connecting to the divine. We're acknowledging the divine by praying. So that already puts us into a particular state. Then through our prayer, we might ask for or state what is important for us. And then an incredibly powerful aspect and necessary aspect of prayer is then to have the faith to let go, and for that to come our way, to trust that the divine is going to bring us what we need, more so necessarily than what we want. So that act of praying in the way that I've just described is the act, on the one hand, of being proactive, and then it's the act of receiving and having faith and trusting that we will receive, that will come back to us. And that balance is very important. It's the putting out and then the receiving, which is the same process followed in a nutshell through the breathwork sessions that we'll be doing. And again, whether this is the actual sessions that we do here in this 1 year process, or whether it's in the session structure of a breathwork session, whereby we have a kind of analytical aspect to the session, which is more of a head aspect, and working with certain intentions. But then the breath work itself is that act of surrender. It's that act of opening up and trusting the trance state, or the bigger state, in order for us to either receive, or to shift, or to transform. So, having our prayers, having an awareness of our prayers is very important. Therefore, having an awareness of our vision at the end of the year is very important, because that makes it possible. It kind of helps organize our thoughts. It kind of helps organize our energy use in the next year. And in so doing, we don't need to waste time with certain distractions. And the main distractions that we actually have as humans is our emotional distractions or our mental distractions, where, and I think this is probably something people experience quite often, where we kind of make an intention perhaps, and then along the way we start doubting, or along the way we start getting lazy, or we maybe lose sight of those intentions. So when we do have a strong sense of our purpose, we don't have space for getting lazy or for getting tired, etc., or getting distracted, because there is a greater sense of where we're going. And I think the breathwork really keeps us on track, not only consciously but unconsciously. Again, doing a process like this 1 year process, it's something that you show up for every month, and show up for in your own practice. There'll be some practices that we'll be doing and laying out for this journey as well. And I really do believe that often at the beginning of any journey, or whenever we set any intention in life, there's this sense of, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? There's so much to do, or there's so much that I have to change ahead. I don't know, I don't have the answers, I don't know, I don't feel I know what I'm doing. But ultimately, we just need to show up every time. We just need to show up for our own spiritual practice. We need to show up for our own process of growth, our journey of growth. And every time we show up, we get a little message, or we get a little insight, or a little bit more experience, or the practice becomes a little bit easier. And therefore we start to open up that channel that we've started to create through our intention. That's kind of the intention's the first step. It's like carving that first part of the channel out, so that our energy can start flowing. And as we keep making time and space for that energy to flow, that channel is going to get broader and broader, and that it'll become more of an effortless stream to follow that channel. And therefore we shouldn't get discouraged when it seems that our intentions are not being fulfilled, or our prayers are not being heard. It's that constant showing up that broadens the channel. And again, the outcome of that intention might change later on, but by starting to cultivate something with awareness and purpose is already the first and the best step in the right direction. So in this journey we'll be working with manifestation and prayer on the one hand, and always where there's manifestation there is magic, or what we call magic. Magic might sound like a superstitious word. Magic is that inexplicable energy of creation. It's of the Creator getting involved in our lives and making things happen, making things possible in ways that our ego couldn't have imagined or conceived of. So when we bring magic into this equation as well, we open to the miracles, we open up to new possibilities. Again, if we go to, let's say, the rational mind and the subconscious, the subconscious is represented by the actual breath, the breathwork state that we go into. The rational mind is the intentional side, or the diagnostical side, or where we try and figure things out in a sort of a rational or reasonable way. That left hand side of the brain then represents us elaborating our prayers, thinking about them. The right hand side of the brain is where we kind of go into a receptive mode, and also where we enter that space of magic. It's that poetic space, it's that underworld space where anything becomes possible. And the more we can let go on this left hand side of the brain, the more the miracles will kind of flow in and open doors. And this is one of the very important factors of breath work itself. Breath work being an altered state of consciousness that we enter. Yes, we need to have our analytical brain, and yes, our analytical brain can help us make sense of certain things in our lives. But when it's time to hand over in the breath work, for example, we need to surrender completely, because the more we surrender, the less we're in this left-hand side of the brain, the more the magic can emerge from this right-hand unconscious side of the brain. So it's almost like, you know, in the right circumstance, we use the left-hand side of the brain. In the right circumstance, we use the right-hand side of the brain. And that's actually very difficult. It's actually really hard to let go. But I do believe that, you know, one of the real rules of manifestation and magic is when we truly let go of something, that is truly when it comes back to us. So, you know, in any process, and certainly this 1 year process, it's like we're going to have the time and the space to define things, and then we have to really be willing to fully let that go on the other hand, so that it can return to us, and so that, you know, new things are possible. The ego personality and the ego survival tricks are based on what's happened before. You know, what behaviors did I use before to survive, or, you know, what ways did I find in order to survive. And as a reproductive way of doing things, not as in reproduction as in, you know, reproducing children, but when we reproduce a memory, when we reproduce a behavior, we're acting on what's happened in the past. But when we go into that right-hand side of the brain, we go into the creative, and we can, you know, generate out of nothing. We don't need to reproduce. We can generate out of nothing new behaviors, new possibilities, new ways in the world, new understandings, and so forth. So it's this balance, it's this kind of balance of the mortal and the infinite, you know, the limited universe on the one hand, or the limited brain, and, you know, our divine self. So through this breath work, we're creating the space for those to merge, and when those two merge, miracles happen, doors open, and so forth. But, you know, one of the first steps is the actual processing side of things, the actual definition side of things. And so now we're just going to have a little bit of time to do that. I'm just going to switch off my screen and put on some music. I'll just give you about 5 to 7 minutes to think about, first of all, where is the flow in your life, and then beyond that, you know, where are the areas of limitation? You know, where is the blockage? Where are things not flowing? So maybe you wanted to sort of have, you know, 2 pages or 2 columns in your journal. You know, where is there flow? Where is there overflow? You know, where is there energy? And that flow might sometimes be excess. And then on the other page, you know, where is there blockage? In terms of the things that you want in your life, where are things getting stuck? Where are you not able to move forward? Or, you know, try as you may, you know, every time, why are certain things getting stuck and stopped in your life? So spend a little bit of time with that now, and then we'll take this a little bit further in a moment. I'll just talk a little bit about, you know, one of the models that I like to work with in terms of manifestation and belief systems, because these are, you know, completely central to our work with breath work and our work with manifestation, is to really kind of understand how our manifestation works. And I think the first thing to bear in mind in working with this model is that our physical body is the lens through which we manifest into this physical world. So our body creates a resonance. It's like a magnet. It's like a radio that sends out a frequency. So that frequency that we are sending out is going to reflect back to us through our reality, through the world that we see out there. in the ways that people respond to us in the world out there. So this physical body is like a resonating, radiating, emitter of energy, and it emits an energy, radiates an energy that gives us feedback through our world and our reality. So our deepest beliefs kind of really sit in our deepest self, and I think in terms of a model, it's kind of through our very center, our hara, the center of our being, which is kind of in the in the belly, in the navel. That is our hara. That is the point through which our energy flows outward. That is the point from which we manifest in this world. So in terms of this model, and I'm going to speak of a symbolic vertical model in the human body, it also so happens that it's in that hara space that our deepest beliefs are most present. Again, it's not to say necessarily that it's all down there, but those beliefs are so ingrained in our body. So it's almost like, this tool that we have to transmit energy has already got this interference from our beliefs. So when we are in our mind, when we're in our heads, and we're kind of functioning on a level here, and this model also sort of really serves well to understand a little bit about breath work. And I'm going to start talking a little bit more about breath work as well in a moment, of course, because we're going to be practicing it. But when we're in our day-to-day distracted mental state, we're in a beta state. And symbolically, I'm going to take it to kind of mean this band here in the head, where we are thinking thoughts. They're kind of superficial thoughts, or they're distracted thoughts. And it's all happening up here. We're not, the depth of the thoughts aren't going down into this deeper place, where we get into our core, from which we manifest, through our hara, through our navel. The thoughts are only sort of happening here, and they're kind of fast and furious and scattered. And that is the zone that we kind of get sort of lost in or trapped in the most. That is also the zone that usually when we're looking at a screen or at a device, that's kind of the zone that we're focusing in on, because we are seeing the vision of someone else, or externals are kind of determining our vision. So a picture of something or a video of something is eliciting emotions in us. So when we're in this phase here, there's a very strong disconnect between what we're consciously thinking about and this deeper stuff, these deeper beliefs that are responsible for our manifestation. So our day-to-day breathing, our day-to-day thoughts, breathing and thoughts are very closely connected and linked. So when we're in this mode here, we're breathing superficially, we're not being conscious, we're sort of just breathing in a sort of unconscious, shallow way. So as soon as we start to relax a little bit more, we start going into an alpha state, an alpha brain frequency, and a slightly deeper way of breathing. So what then happens is, we start to connect a little bit more with our body, and we start to connect a little bit more with who we are deeper down. Now, when we're in this space here, we're kind of just floating around in our heads, and we're being constantly pulled out by our distractions. So when we start going down through our alpha frequency, we start getting a sense of our body, and we start getting a sense of what's down there. And very often we don't want to go out of this space here, because there might be a little bit of pain down here. So we start to enter this frequency. As we take our breathing even deeper, we start going down into delta and theta. So that starts to become a deep, full breath, and that starts to connect us to our deeper being, beyond the individual, and into more of a transpersonal experience. So when we do conscious breath work, we are taking ourselves out of this and putting ourselves more into this deeper, almost non-verbal space, where we're going into some of those non-verbal, belief systems that were imprinted before birth, during birth, and in the early years of childhood. And it's usually those beliefs that are imprinted in the first 3 to 7 years of our lives that are the deepest and the most difficult to break. So sitting here, deep down here in our hara, in our center, is this place from which we're manifesting. And as we start to take our breath and our consciousness down into these deeper beliefs, we start to re-experience some of those beliefs, some of those emotions, some of the causes of that, and then we can start to aerate them, start to shift them, putting higher frequency consciousness into a lower frequency belief system. And as we start to aerate, symbolically speaking, to aerate that, bringing lightness, bringing prana, bringing energy into those heavy beliefs down there, they start to shift. And then, of course, what we see in the world out there starts to shift. So the more profoundly we get into those deep beliefs, the more profoundly they will start to shift, and the more effectively we will see the world out there. We will see what we are manifesting in the world out there. But our expansion through breath isn't only sort of here and down, it's also sort of outward. That's where our consciousness starts to expand. We start to be able to see beyond the filters of the ego. We can start to see what else is out there, what else is possible. And that, of course, is when we connect to higher mind. So we're expanding our consciousness up to welcome that higher mind, that higher consciousness, inspired thinking, a broader intuition, a broader experience of soul. We start allowing that into this headspace here so that we can really expand what we believe to be possible. That expanded belief system can also then get taken down into those deep beliefs within us where we manifest from. And of course, that opens a channel and a conduit for us to manifest so much more effectively. So in that way, the breathing connects us to our deepest inner self. It connects us to our highest self, and therefore we start to just kind of expand out and become broader and bigger, better versions of ourselves. And again, of necessity, what we manifest, what we transmit in the world starts to change. And it's not only about the breathing. Breathing isn't the only way into that place, but certainly breathing is the most kind of accessible and one of the simplest ways to get into that space. So manifestation will not work when we are just here in our heads and thinking, oh, I want to stop smoking, and oh, I want to manifest a beautiful new house. When it's here, when it's disconnected, it's not going to go down into that deep space of belief. The deeper, the belief up here might be, I want a new house, that kind of fulfills all my space needs. But then deep down here, the belief system is, you don't deserve. So no matter what happens up here, no matter how many times you repeat an affirmation, if it doesn't get rooted, if it's not a visceral experience of shifting that belief, you won't manifest. So of course, one can ask the question, well, how do I know when I get that visceral experience? And that happens, when we do the breath work, when we have one of those big releases, when we have that sense of a great relief coming, or a sense of just having expelled something, gotten rid of something, or kind of an epiphany of just a knowing or an insight as to how this can be done and how it can happen. So one of the aspects of breath work that we can always do and practice is to take this energy, the prana energy, or the energy of possibility. Just be aware of taking it into those deeper beliefs and letting the higher frequency come in and shift the lower frequency. And that's not even necessarily something you need to think about consciously. The breath just does it. The very act of breathing is an act of giving permission for that higher self to, or higher mind, or higher perspective to come in and to shift the deeper, denser energy down there. So often in the breathwork sessions that I run, you'll hear me saying, breathing is giving permission, and that's absolutely what it is about. Is when you breathe consciously, you're giving permission for the divine, for the prana to come in and to work in your body and in your life. Very often the superficial thoughts here, or some of the deeper beliefs here, get in the way of your conscious permission. But breathing is actually about giving unconscious permission for those shifts and changes. So just the very act of breathing in itself is already enough to start that process of shift and change. And as I mentioned before, in talking about the prayer starts to open the channel. The prana, the breathing keeps pumping energy along that channel, that new channel of manifestation that you've conceived of. And every time you keep revisiting that space, that channel becomes wider and broader. And that's not just a metaphorical channel, that is also kind of a neural channel in your brain. The breath work works with your neuroplasticity. It opens up new pathways in the brain, new possibilities, kind of shifts out the filtered, or the very specific channels that have already been created on a neural level, and it makes new pathways possible. So a simple example of that is, when we have an addiction, it's a particular neural pathway that is opened, and that gives some sort of perceived benefit on a conscious or subconscious level. So that neural pathway just very automatically becomes a way of experiencing life, or taking a drug or having sex or eating food is kind of, for the subconscious mind, a guarantee of, okay, this is going to make me happy or feel good, even though it has got a negative side effect. So when we start, working with our neuroplasticity, we're starting to open up new pathways to make new behaviors possible, taking energy from these habits and addictions here and putting that energy into a new expression and a new way. And that's something that happens quite simply and easily when we start to expand our consciousness, and when we move out of the left side brain, the left side of the brain's way of thinking, which is very linear, very, very rational. When we go into this expanded right side of the brain experience, all of those kind of neural pathways become undifferentiated in a way, because we're expanding our consciousness. They become undifferentiated. No longer do we have those, very specific channels that are, taking the energy to very specific places. It becomes undifferentiated, and then new connections can be made so that we can change our behaviors, or get new inspirations, or get a different sense of knowing as to open us up to new ways of being. So that is, one of the ways of understanding or explaining breathwork, and how breathwork works on kind of a spiritual and quite practical level. Of course, when we are doing conscious breathing, we are breathing prana, life force energy, and we are breathing in a different way. We're breathing in a conscious way. Whenever we do something with consciousness, we kind of magnify that and expand it. So, when we're breathing day to day, walking down the street, we're kind of, again, in this beta state. We're kind of, reacting to the world. We're not particularly going inwards. We're just breathing in a completely automatic way. But when we lie down or sit down and close our eyes and breathe with consciousness, change the way of breathing, we're magnifying the possibility. We are putting our attention on the breath in order for the breath to become a catalyst of change in our lives. And all of the purifications relating to the 5 elements are actually very simple, kind of unconscious things that we do in our lives that are turned around when we give them consciousness. So for example, the earth element, which is the element of the body, through fasting is transformed. So when we fast, when we change the way that we eat, we are changing our body's relationship to food and the world around it. And very often that, when we fast, a whole lot of emotional and other stuff comes up. And eventually when we break through some of those resistances, we go into a very sort of transcendent spiritual state just through changing the way that we eat. So fasting through consciousness changes our physiological relationship with self and with our bodies. The breath work, of course, we're changing our mind patterns. We're changing the way the brain works. We're changing the quality of thoughts that we are inviting in. And those higher quality thoughts are shifting the lower frequency thoughts and shifting the deeper beliefs so that we can hold a new mental state and therefore, create a new relationship with our outside world. The element of water relates to our relationships, and very simply, spending conscious time with water, with physical water, is a way of transmuting our relationships. And one of the practices there is conscious bathing, or doing breath work in water, where we're bringing the element of air through the breath and water together in order to create a very powerful emotional release. And then the element of fire is a way, sitting consciously with the element of fire often and for long periods of time, it creates an alchemy. It shifts the light energy that is within us, because we're getting an experience of an external fire which emits incredible energy, not just in terms of heat and light, but on other levels, that is interacting with our aura. It's cleansing our aura. The light, that are a few meters away, or the light that is a few meters away, is transmuting the light that is within us on a very physical, tangible level. So when we spend this conscious time with the elements, we change our relationship to the elements, and then we can change our relationship with ourselves and with the world out there. So when we're breathing, first of all, we are breathing at a different rhythm. We're breathing in a different way. And the way that I'll be suggesting today, and for most of our breathing, will be a connected breath, which is like this. That means there's no kind of gap or tapering off between the breaths. So it's not the following, it's not this, it's not. It's almost like a lazy breath. It's the connected breath is like a pumping. It's like a pumping action. The unconscious breath, even though it might be deeper, it's kind of a drifting off here and then drifting off there. And even though that'll probably relax you, it won't necessarily get you into an altered state of consciousness. It could eventually, but the connected breathing is more effective. What the connected breathing does is you're taking in prana in a conscious way, and then by keeping that rhythm going, you're just focusing on more and more and more prana within your inner self. So you are literally filling yourself up with prana. You're pumping more and more water into a cup. And as you do so, eventually that cup will overflow. Let's say that cup has kind of muddy water in it. As you keep pumping that clean water, which is the prana, the muddy water being the old emotions or the old thoughts and the old beliefs, as you keep pumping in that water, first of all, that will muddy the entire cup, but eventually that will, get rid of all the muddiness in that water until that water is very clear. But then what will also then happen is there will be a great expansion. So, your energy expands, that amount of prana that you're holding in yourself kind of pushes all the boundaries, pushes you into an expanded state of consciousness, but also, pushes you out of those ways in which you've held back on yourself, the ways in which you've limited yourself. And a very simple a very simple example of that is, if we take the water metaphor, if you've got a plastic bottle that's kind of all scrunched up and you pump water into it and fill it up, eventually those dents from the scrunched up bottle are going to fill out. So then your energy can be restored to what it should be, as opposed to having these constrictions. So when we come up against those constrictions internally, emotionally or mentally, first of all, it's going to be like trying to pump, a huge amount of energy through a constricted hose pipe or, artery or whatever. So it might be painful, or that might feel like a buildup, or it might feel like a blockage. But eventually that will release. That constriction, that resistance will release, and the energy can flow again. And again, when that energy flows, it's like opening up that kind of neuroplasticity. It's opening up new channels, channels that have been underfed, channels that have been neglected, channels that have, for the ego or for the subconscious mind, looked like a threat to life because of certain traumas. Those channels are opened up so that the energy can flow correctly. And when the energy flows correctly and in a balanced way, we can then reconnect to our true self. We can reconnect to who we are supposed to be and what our potential is. And in so doing, then we can have sort of a balanced energy. And, in terms of breath work, there's so many different experiences that can come up in the breath work. There's so many different ways of experiencing the breath work state. But in terms of how it works or why it works, it's almost like this prana, which is life force energy, goes in, it goes through the body, it scans, it sees where there's constriction, it sees where there's excess, and it just balances everything out. And as it gets balanced out, as we get balanced out internally, the body, the inner healer, knows exactly what to do to allow us to be ourselves, our true selves, without, certain parts of the mind or the emotions being in excess and other parts being deprived or in resistance. So then we can return to that innocent self that I spoke about earlier, that true self of who we really are, and then we can start to see ourselves better. We can start to understand ourselves kind of in a bigger context. And then when we can do that, we can just really, live our lives or attract to ourselves the conditions that support us to be that true self. So just that very simple act, first of all, of balancing, getting the energy flowing correctly, and then from there going into a space where that energy is kind of enhanced and augmented, and with a continued breathing gives more space for the soul, gives more space for the true expression. That is really where the expansion starts to take place. But we kind of need to be balanced first, get everything in alignment, and then from there we can really expand and push our awareness outwards, and get a broader vision of ourselves. And on the one hand, when we're breathing in this prana life force energy, we filling ourselves up with the inhale, but then with the exhale we are releasing, and that goes back to the etymology of the Latin words for breathing. In Spanish it's respiración, which means to re-spirit ourselves. The word to breathe in Spanish is inspiración, but it also means inspiration. So when we breathe in, we're taking spirit into ourselves, and we're putting that energy of spirit, of prana, into the body. And then the word for exhale is expiración, which is to expire. It's letting the spirit out. It's dying. It's a little death. So every in-breath is taking in more spirit and inspiration. Every exhale is dying a little bit more to who we've been, to the ego, to the past. And that continued cycle of breathing is re-spiriting, respiración, respiring. So we're keeping that flow going, but very much also releasing the stuff that we no longer need to hold on to. So the out breath is a dying to the past, dying to our issues, dying to our traumas, and that the in-breath is bringing in more of that clear running water, that prana that fills us with greater clarity and returns us to our innocent state, which is our state of truest, me-ness or you-ness, or who we really are, we-ness. We really expand into that state of our truest being, and from that state of our truest being we can see so much better who we are, where we should be, what we want to be, what we want to be doing in our lives. And the process of getting there can be a process of going through very physical stuff, letting go of physical things, working through physical cramps. Often when we do breath work, we get tetany, which is a tightness in the hands, and that can actually be quite alarming sometimes for people. But that tetany is something that happens a lot in the beginning of one's work with breath work. And that's something that tends to happen less often as we move forward, as we get more familiar with breath work. But that tetany is also, for me, symbolically about how we hold on, how we hold on to aspects of ourselves, aspects of our lives. So if we're really holding on tight and trying to control too much, we might get this tetany that reflects as the hands. And there's not all that much one can do about the tetany in the breath work, except maybe changing the breathing rhythm. But there's no danger in that tetany. It might be a little bit painful, but there's nothing that can go wrong with that. So sometimes you've just got to actually breathe through the tetany. But then beyond that, energy rushes up and down the body happen quite a lot, and also maybe like a tightness in the mouth and sort of tightness in different parts, cramps in different parts. When we get any form of tightness or cramp, it's kind of symbolic of where we're holding onto something. And that then of course takes us to a more sort of metaphysical understanding perhaps of our body and our ailments. It's like, if there a tightness comes up in the heart, it's like, okay, what energy is being held on in the heart, and in terms of love and in terms of opening. And Kathy here put something about, this is about letting go. It absolutely is. It's about going beyond the holding on and gracefully, graciously learning to let go and to surrender. So we want to observe, whatever comes up in the body, because when we breathe, we're taking ether, we're taking prana energy, and we're putting it into, or let's say free energy. It's kind of uncommitted, unattached spiritual energy out here. We're kind of putting that into the physical body, which is about limitation, which is very kind of directed energy. And the physical body is a system of holding and directing energy, a connection to those different parts of the body, like the hands and letting go, the heart and our emotions, or our legs, our ability to move forward. So the physical body in the different parts hold energy. And of course also our cells, our cells being a smaller building block. It's actually in our cells that our memory is held. It's not somewhere in the back of our brain. It's each and every cell holds information. So when we do conscious breath work, we're also doing a general wash of the cells themselves, of the message and memory that is in those cells. And that of course brings us to that principle of spiritual death, or physical symbolic death, and then spiritual rebirth. And literally, when we die to our old selves, we are washing away old memories. When we die physically, when we die, our last breath, that is literally the act of letting this vehicle go and being released into the divine. But when we have the little deaths, the symbolic deaths, like through breath work or through other deep trance processes, we're undergoing little controlled symbolic deaths, which very effectively erase just a little bit more of the story, erase just a little bit more of the energy that we're holding onto. Energy being held onto consciously or unconsciously, but stories nonetheless that we're holding onto. So when we do this conscious breathing, in general, we'll breathe and a general cleaning will take place, but then we might realize there's specific parts that need more work, and that is when stuff will come up for us, be that physical, be that mental, emotional, which can be experienced as some sort of regression or reliving some sort of difficult memory, and having a catharsis. We kind of need to have that visceral catharsis. And literally what happens there is, when we have these catharses in, maybe on an emotional level, but we really feel it in the body, literally what's happening is there's an energetic surgery being, taking place, and energy is being ripped out of the body. It's almost like, with our breath, we're creating a space in ourselves, a space of safety, a space of protection, in a way kind of an optimal space for healing, and then that stuff can just be kind of taken out and ripped out of us. And again, the body, the subconscious mind knows exactly what's needed in order for that healing to take place. So we have these surgeries, be it a physical surgery, like an energy that just gets released. It could also be an emotional or sort of memory surgery that takes place, where the emotional charge around that particular thing is just kind of neutralized or taken out, where we just realize, oh, I'm not that 5-year-old person anymore who had that trauma happen. I am now 40 years old or whatever. I've survived this, and I no longer need to live in terms of that trauma. So, these surgeries can take place on different levels. But every time we have this catharsis, not only do we become lighter, but we also create more space for spirit to come in and to transform us, and again, to return us to that space of innocence. And that's a very complex process, of course. It's very complex on the one hand, but what I'm trying to say is it's actually very simple. All of this stuff is happening. The inner healer, the subconscious mind, the body knows what's out of balance. It knows what's meant to be released or should be released. But often we don't give ourselves or our bodies or our subconscious mind enough space for that release to take place. Giving space is not only about time, but also about us feeling safe, and the subconscious mind feeling open enough to release. The conscious mind, the left hand side of the brain, is all about the structure, and it's all about the things that are holding us together. So when we're in that structured ego state, when we're in normal consciousness, it's really hard to make the visceral shifts, because we're in one particular mode of being, which is kind of survival. When we go into that other side, the right hand side of the brain, metaphorically speaking, we open up, and we open up to magic. We open up to the inner knowing that's within us, the inner healer. And because we then feel safe and open and trusting, those things can be released, and we can move beyond, so that we can heal. So healing is, always really just about giving us a little bit of time, time out from our normal, day-to-day lives, having a safe space, of course, which is what we are creating, in this group and in this work, having the safe space, and then being open to letting the shifts happen. And on the one hand, yes, the safe space is what holds it, but always it's our soul connection and the connection to the divine that makes it possible for that shift to occur. So the breath work can be used as a spiritual practice. It can be used as a therapeutic practice. It can be used as a means to reach our highest potential, or a means to heal those deeper emotional, mental, physical afflictions that we have. But it's always kind of working on the whole. It's always kind of working in the round or in the circle. And when we deny the body the spirit can't flourish. When we deny the spirit, the body and our emotional well-being also can't flourish. So we really do work on the holistic level, which means that in some sessions you might get a little bit of everything. You might get some physical stuff and then emotional and then spiritual epiphany, or otherwise maybe one particular session you just really need to go into some of the physical pains and resistances and breathe through them. And the only advice that I ever give people in those situations is you've just got to breathe through it. You've got to, if something comes up, take your consciousness, your breath into that part of the body and work with healing that. Or if it's emotional, breathe into those emotions to make them bigger, to make it more, because eventually you will breathe all the way through that so that it becomes neutralized, that it no longer sits there and has an unconscious hold on you. It's something that you can breathe out, literally. You can release and work through. And it's as simple as just breathing through it, maintaining the awareness and the consciousness and breathing through, trusting that you're safe, trusting that your soul is taking care of you. And when we do enough of that, going back to that image of the bottle being filled with water, those dents being kind of pushed out, that we return to our integral shape and state. When that happens, we can just be our true selves. And when we are that, we radiate and therefore transmit the right energy, which will then come back to us in terms of what we manifest in the world. So that's kind of the breath work in a nutshell, maybe a little bit of how it works or what it's about. Let's have a 5-minute break now, where you can go to the bathroom, where you can get your beds set up. I'll talk a little bit more about the breathing and how we're going to breathe afterwards. Then we'll do a breathwork session, and then afterwards we'll have some space for some sharing and feedback and questions, and I'll also talk about the structure of the training process.